and he was just very, what mood is he going to be in? You know what I mean? Look out. My brother wasn't afraid of him, but I was, you know what I mean?
What was it like to tour the world with one of the most iconic albums in history? In this exclusive interview, Bruce Kulick reveals the incredible story of how he and his brother Bob joined Meat Loaf's Bat Out of Hell tour, the challenges of going from small theatres to headlining arenas, and the emotional highs and lows of working with the legendary Meat Loaf. From getting booed off stage to selling out arenas, Bruce shares stories that shaped his career and prepared him for life with Kiss. I'm Paul Stevenson from VRP Rocks, and this is Bruce Kulick. Obviously, Bat Out of Hell was a massive album, and you and your brother Bob toured with that album, didn't you, with Meat Loaf, and
Yep.
went around the world with it. I mean, how did you get involved with that to start with, and what was it like touring on such a monster album?
Yeah, I mean, believe me, growing up in New York had its advantages, certainly with back then. The word was out looking for guitar players. My brother, being 4 years older than me, was a bit more ahead of the game career-wise. Okay. So it was very easy for him to hear about things like that. And the fact that they were looking for two guitar players, kind of like that Hunter Wagner thing that Lou Reed used and Alice Cooper used, Steve Hunter, Dick Wagner, tremendous guitar players. And Bob knew Dick Wagner and did a little work out actually with Alice Cooper, ironically enough, for when Steve went off to something. Anyway, they were looking for a double, two guitar players, and we just happened to fit the bill. The record was very unusual when we heard it. Todd Rundgren I loved. Okay, so for me, there was this. For me, the Todd's riffs were like an Eric Clapton and other players that I admired, and I knew that he put his stamp on that record, quite a bit. And my brother's not the guy to study and, dissect a solo and then recreate it. He was his own. Sometimes I was envious of that. But then again, I used to like to, build things. So when I listened to guitar players, I wanted to deconstruct. What do they do here? How do you do that? So it was really valuable for Meat Loaf and the band and the management to know, well, when there was important Todd Rundgren riffs, I had it covered,
Yeah.
and my brother had all the attitude and pizzazz, and the two of us worked off each other like that. And now we're on tour, starting off very rocky, to be honest. It didn't go well in the very, very beginning. People were like 300-pound, sweating guy in a tuxedo with this kind of strange piano player, 9 people on stage. We got booed off the stage when we were opening for Cheap Trick, but somehow, by the time, in a short period of time, we did the CBS convention, which was very important. CBS, records, okay. And a lot of big people were there, and all of a sudden they started pouring money into Meat Loaf's album to get on the radio, and the phones lit up. And the next thing you know, we went from, just playing smaller places and theaters and things to arenas. And that year was wild to go from nothing to headlining arenas and touring the world. It was a long year, and there was a lot of it that was very hard for me, just emotionally. I believe, and I love Meat Loaf, so this is not a slag, but he was definitely using something, and he was just very. What mood is he going to be in? You know what I mean? Look out. My brother wasn't afraid of him, but I was. You know what I mean? And by the way, of course, years later, I always had a great relationship with him, and it was so sad when he passed away. But it was a great experience for me because that would kind of get me ready for Kiss. Doing arena tours is different, and it's wonderful, and yet it's very hard, and it's a different kind of pressure, and it's different things that you have to deal with. But I will admit, I'm really glad I got that under my belt before I got the call to join Kiss, and I'm very aware that Meat Loaf is just worldwide super famous, and especially in England.
Yes.
Although it came up recently, I had lunch with a guy here in Vegas who knows a lot of musicians, and he's in a completely different industry, food and beverage, but loves Meat Loaf. And there was another guy that I met, and I started sharing Meat Loaf stories and sending photos, and then he's good friends with one of Meat's daughters, Pearl a Day. who I know and I've met, and he just had a birthday recently too, Meat Loaf. So everybody was talking about Meat Loaf. So I just hope that album, that music, and the legend of Meat Loaf carries on forever. I do. And my one regret was that the band that I performed with, which was that original Bat Out of Hell tour, that we never got a chance to do that one more time. Now he went out many times with talented players, good foils as the singer, but we had Carla DeVito, and Steinman was performing with us for at least, I think, the first half of the year. And I'll never forget, and the photos I have of that are precious to me. And many of my Kiss fans, they may not be a Meat Loaf fan, but everyone knows Meat Loaf, but they didn't know it. You know what I mean? I'm always sharing that. And it was an album that my wife, Lisa, and we're very tight about everything, and she's a terrific singer, besides being my wife and a great cook and all the other things, an artist. But she grew up listening to that album, meant everything to her. And we have performed 2 Out of 3 Ain't Bad many times at some, events when we do them, and she just kills it. And she says, that's my favorite song. You know what I mean? So there's an interesting thread in my life that Meat Loaf comes up a lot in interesting ways, for sure.
Fascinating stuff. I just want to quickly rewind to what you were saying earlier about deconstructing guitarists. So let's go back a little bit. Who were your guitarist kind of inspirations when you were younger? Who did you listen to and say, I want to be a guitarist, I want to be like him, I want to learn to play like him?
Well, it started with the Beatles, but for me, that was the band, the music, the vibe, the cultural changes that started to happen with the British invasion completely. But as soon as I heard Cream with Eric Clapton, I was like, oh my God, my brother too. We were both affected by all the same guitarists. Jimi Hendrix, probably still my number one guitarist. Certainly Jimmy Page and what Zeppelin was doing, Led Zeppelin 1. It was just mind-blowing to listen to this stuff. I did enjoy some of the progressive music, like from bands like Yes and King Crimson, but still Cream, which then there wouldn't have been a Mountain with Leslie West without Cream, you know what I mean? And, there's not a lot of parallels for Jimmy Page, except later on you got bands like Van, the band I'm talking about, Greta Van Fleet, I mean, but I'm just talking about that era. I think they did a damn good job of channeling that music, which is so special. Jeff Beck, what a monster guitar player. So I delved into that, and I remember at times when I had a gig, but I was traveling, and maybe I had a residency gig with one of the disco artists I worked with, and I'm there for a week. So I'm like, well, what am I going to do? Oh, back then it was a cassette player, and I had my guitar. The cassette player is not going to play loud. It's just one of these little guys with a speaker in it, right? Yeah. And I'm studying Blow by Blow by Jeff Beck, trying to pick out the riffs, or a Hendrix record. You know what I mean? I didn't have the tools that I've had in the last 10 years. Now they have apps. You could slow things down. You can tune it to them, so you're not struggling. I wish I had $1 for every fan that says, how do you play Tears Are Falling? What key is it in? Well, we used to monkey around with the vari speed when you're mixing and going to the master, and then, let's pick up the tempo a little bit. Well, then it's out of tune with the guitar, but you don't care. But and then it's like we didn't play it in that key anyway, when we performed it live. So I'm always explaining it. But those guitar players changed my life. And there's so many more. I mean, when you move into later years, you have that Eddie Van Halen, who really did love Clapton. And I had seen a video once where he could play Crossroads note for note, but he still sounded like Eddie Van Halen, but he had it down. So he incorporated that into his all those other techniques that he could do. Now, Randy Rhoads, who's so iconic, approached things differently, and I'm not sure who his influences were, but very influential in the 80s. But as soon as you got into later on, I admired a lot of the players, but none of them, inspired me the same way. So I'm always going back to, if I'm flashy, like I needed to be with Kiss, it was whatever I could absorb from Eddie, but I couldn't play everything that he could play. So I just made it my own, and guys like that. But then I would incorporate, the Clapton stuff that I loved. People may not hear it, but I know it's there. The Jimmy Page stuff that I studied, the Hendrix stuff that I studied, even the Steve Howe stuff that I studied from Yes. So I love that I had a wide taste and appreciation of many guitar players. I studied jazz too, which came in a little handy when I needed to throw in a fancy chord inversion, for a song like the breakdown of God Gave Rock and Roll to You has some interesting chords. So that was all really in my toolkit of how to be an effective guitarist. So it's really helped my career, obviously.